Well, hello folks, and welcome to episode 211 of Retropower and Cut. And you join me in the fabrication shop once more, and we are leaning up against an Aston Martin DBS, which, as you can see, has now been stripped down. Matt has been finishing on the final straight of getting all this pulled apart. I think last week he was just removing the aluminium panels from this, which obviously is all finished now, and he's taken the roof skin off as well. And we can see the body shell revealed in all its glory. Now he's finished taking the final mechanical parts off it, removed the remainder of the suspension parts from it. We have a bare body shell now, which, as you can see, is now on its side. Interestingly, it's on a bit of a makeshift frame. There have been various decisions made, and one of those is the reason why it's on this frame, which I'll come to in a minute. So, at the latter stages of strip down on this last week, I was trying to get my head in gear with making the final plans for the running gear. Now, various discussions have taken place between us and the customer on this front, and we think we have the bulk of the plan for the running gear that's going into this car. There were a number of decisions to make around the power plant and transmission, which we pretty much decided on, which I'm not going to mention at the moment, but it is not an Aston Martin power plant. The decision is almost final on it not being an Aston Martin power plant, and the power output of that power plant then governs some of the further decisions to be made on the build of the car. Now, at the point we started this project, my idea was to try and keep the suspension probably a later iteration of Aston Martin. However, the more I researched that and the more investigation I did, the more dissatisfied I was with the results. I came to the conclusion fairly early on in this sort of thinking through and research phase that the Didion rear end, much as I'm actually quite a fan of Didion rear ends, I actually quite like the way Didion cars handle, it's not really going to work. We're going to be putting too much power through the Didion setup, and it's not really going to work for a variety of reasons. I wanted to go outboard brake. I don't like the inboard brake setup. If at all possible, I don't like the inboard brake setup. Yes, it's better from an unsprung weight point of view. That's not really an issue on a car of the inevitable weight of an Aston DBS, but I think we've covered that before. What is an issue is brake cooling, and we can't get the brake cooling. So I think we really want to go outboard brake. Now, my plan was to go outboard brake using later Aston Martin parts. However, they're almost impossible to get hold of because they weren't made for very long. And then what I discovered was trying to source a later outboard brake Aston V8 Vantage rear beam axle was that there was actually a factory recall on them for cracking, and that the end casings were cracking off the beams, and that was with a factory level of power in the car. And we're going to have significantly more than a factory Aston level of power. So all of those concerns added together to make me decide that I wanted to do a full independent rear end. So that was one decision made. The next decision was what to do with the front end, and further investigation of the standard Aston Martin front end and actually having it laid out in front of me, not just in a parts diagram, led me to conclude that it's not really suitable. The setup on this car now is not good enough. Now, the later Astons, again, were a great improvement, particularly the Virage setup. The front end on the Virage, which was based on the Lagonda previous to that, is actually a much nicer setup. But again, there are various parts of it that are almost impossible. I'll cite one example. The front upright is almost a Jaguar upright. It's almost a Jaguar XJS upright. It uses the same ball joints, top and bottom, and most of the forging looks like a Jaguar XJS upright. Only it isn't, because instead of having a pressed-in stub axle running on taper and taper roller bearings for the wheel, it actually uses a package bearing, which is great. A package bearing is very nice. It's a package bearing flange unit, much like most modern cars use. However, I have no idea what vehicle it's off. I can't believe that Aston had their own uprights and bearings tooled specifically for the Lagonda and the Virage and the V8 Vantage. However, it appears that they perhaps did, because I can't find what that package bearing is from. It would have been in the very early days of package sub bearings being fitted to cars, and it certainly predated anything British using those package bearings, and I can't find out what that's from. And they seem to change money for exorbitant sums of money second hand. So I kind of concluded that that's a blind alley. There's no point building a car around obsolete parts that are almost irreplaceable. So, moving on from there, thinking again about the rear end, the power output that we're looking at would also put any potential donors for suitable rear end running gear right on the limits of their power capability. Basically, the strongest differentials, in my experience, available on the UK market from a production car with good part support, with a variety of ratios available for the crown wheel and pinions, are basically Jaguar units, which were based on the old Salisbury 4HU unit. They're pretty strong. They use I think it's 8.5 or 8 3/4 inch crown wheel. They're a very strong unit, and as a rule of thumb, and this is the rule of thumb that I know a good few people work to, they're good for 600 horsepower and 600 foot-pounds of torque. Put things in perspective, this car's going to have more than that. And so I'm concerned that we're going to have running gear that's right on the ragged edge of its suitability. So all of those things added up basically meant that we need to look at American parts. We need to look at a Ford 9-inch base rear differential, and we need to look at different hubs and uprights. And when we get into that game, it's actually easier to look across the pond to our friends in America and source parts from the other side of the pond, because they're actually more suited to that level of power and torque, and just better parts are available. To that end, we're currently having a chat. In fact, as I speak, Cal may well have spoken or be speaking to, because he's over at SEMA at the moment, he may well be speaking to the guys at Roadster Shop, and I'll drop that as a little teaser that we're talking to Roadster Shop, and that's the direction that the front and rear ends in this car are going. And that should be a little clue, and I'll unreveal this in clues rather than all at once, but that should be a clue as to the way the build of the car is going, in that we're going to be sourcing a complete front and rear assemblies for this, which will be American-built assemblies. So we're pretty pleased that that's the route we're going. I'm happier now that I've got a selection of parts that are more than capable of handling the performance that the vehicle's going to have, which is going to be very considerable. So that's where the running gear's at in the background. Going back to the crude nuts and bolts sat here on its side, the reason for the frame rather than a rotisserie is that in order to fit that running gear, there's going to be a lot of surgery, and most of the bottom of the car will be going. So there's no point at all in me making rotisserie mounts to fit to the existing car, because they won't fit to the existing car after the fabrication's done. And the fabrication will be done on one of the jig benches, on one of the Select MUF7 benches. So there's no point in me making things to fit this car, because they won't fit anymore after the fabrication's done. So what we've done is made some very crude L frames, which we've done in the past where we've had cars where we didn't want to put them on a rotisserie for whatever reason. Made some very crude, Matt's made up some very crude L frames in 75 to 50 box section, which are then just stitch welded to the jacking points and onto the chassis rails, so that we can roll the car onto its side, which means Matt can then clean off all the underseal and sealer and mess from underneath, scrape off any sort of soft materials from the car so we can get it ready for blasting. Again, it's a bit of a moot point cleaning all of the soft materials and underseal off parts of the car that we're not actually going to be using. But the problem is I don't really want, it never looks very nice to partially blast the car. It doesn't look very nice in the workshop, and we never quite know if there's another bit that we're going to need that we didn't blast. So actually we will blast the whole car, and we will clean up the whole car, but inevitably a lot of the body shell will be discarded inevitably in this process. But certainly we need to clean up all of the upper half so that we can get any metalwork restoration done in areas that we are keeping. And we also then need to proceed with the aluminium panels, which I'll mention in passing later. We're not really going to go into depth on that at the moment, but we will be repairing the aluminium panels. It will be retaining an aluminium body, this car, not a carbon fibre or composite body. We'll be retaining an aluminium body, and quite a lot of it, looking at the condition of it, quite a lot of it will probably need rebuilding. That's all for the future. So at the moment, though, Matthew is cleaning all this down, getting it ready so that we can next week get it in the blast room, get it cleaned back to bare metal, and have a look at possibly getting it onto a jig bench at some point, shuffling in and amongst all the other work that's in the workshop at the moment. So that's where things are at on that. Moving on, onto Wasabi, and there's an engine on the floor here, so we'll probably talk about that fairly early on. Bobby was actually off. The Terminator was actually off poorly. There's a particularly nasty bug going around. I think we might have mentioned on last week's video, and it's gradually taking people out with it. My daughter's very ill at the moment with whatever this bug may be, and Bobby was quite unusually quite ill on Monday and Tuesday this week, so he wasn't in on Monday and Tuesday, but picked up yesterday on getting some more of the initial big major components for Wasabi ready so that they can go into the body shell and we know what we're working around. We know we're not going to get tripped up by the sizes of anything. We've got scans of all of these parts, but assembling them from a crude scan data. We don't want to spend ages refining scan data we're not going to need. So we've got a crude scan of this engine. However, it's not a very refined scan, and there's no point us having a particularly refined scan because we're not really going to use it for much else. So George has done an initial check with that to make sure we've got clearance on the bonnet and various other things, but it's not a final check. So what we want to do is actually have the engine and transmission in the car when we do the fabrication work. Then we know what's going to fit and what isn't going to fit. So to that end, we have, and I'm going to forget what all of these things are called. I think that's an OA3 transmission. It's from the Audi S4, actually. It is from a V8 Audi S4, 2007. 6-speed manual transmission, no DSG, no funny business, just a manual 6-speed normal stick shift transmission. And then this is an engine that I can never remember the model number of. It is the more modern Audi 20-valve 5-cylinder inline engine, which I believe comes from a non-UK market Passat. We're guided heavily on this by Dave Rowe at EPS Motorsport, as he is the man with these things, and this is the basis of the power plant for his mid-engined Grumpy car and his previous car, which I can't remember the name of, that he has taken to Pikes Peak a number of times, that he's competed in at Pikes Peak a number of times. And this is the basis he uses, which I wholeheartedly agree with, because the early UR Quattro 20-valve engine, the cylinder heads are not a very good design at all. They're not a very good basis to work from. They're very hard work. They don't flow very well. They're hard to make flow very well, and they inevitably crack, which is a bit annoying. After you put a lot of money into making one flow properly, it then cracks between the spark plug and the exhaust valve seats, which is quite irritating. Even when you start with a normally aspirated head, which we've done in the past, they still eventually crack. Because these heads are much more robust, are much better designed. The exhaust ports are much better designed. The inlet ports are much better designed. It's just a much more modern design of cylinder head. However, it was designed as a transverse installation engine, which makes life a little bit more complicated. And there are various bits. All the timing gear is effectively on the back of the engine when it's in a longitudinal installation, which makes life a little bit more complicated. But anyway, we were having a look at that. I was looking at that with Bobby yesterday. There's a little modification to do on the bell housing of the V8 Audi gearbox to get that to clear the timing housing on the 5-cylinder engine. We've done that yesterday, cut the aluminium out of the way. It's basically losing a lug and a little bit of material from the top of the bell housing, but that's done now, and now that bolts on. It is a bolt-on fit. There's a whole lot of bits that don't look like they're designed to line up, but there'll be quite a lot of machine parts sorting that out. Obviously, cam cover will all be gone, timing cover will all be changed. There's a lot of things that got to be changed on that, and it will look very physically different to that now. Now, we actually, Dave gave us some engine mounts, which are actually for a UR Quattro to fit this block, which are bolted on now. We bolted them on yesterday and then realised they weren't really going to gain us a lot in here. We weren't sure until we put them on exactly what they lined up with. Well, what they line up with is nothing really, so we're not going to be using those. He gave us those mounts for a previous project, the UR Quattro project that we were working on. That's why we had those mounts. We thought we would put them on and just try, but they're asymmetric, and we needed basically a symmetric mounting arrangement for this car, so we've been making our own mounts. So at the moment, the hold up on this is we're waiting for some M12 fine, M12 by 1.5 pitch threaded bar to make some long subframe mountings for the front, because to be able to put the front subframe mountings on, we need a very long thread, much longer than the standard bolts, because they have to go through the actual subframe mountings, basically through this piece here, and through the bush, and through the engine mount carrier, which also sandwiches on the same bolt. The whole lot sandwiches together and needs to go through that. So we need some very long, around 200mm long M12 by 1.5 bolts. So we've got some M12 by 1.5 threaded bar coming, but it hasn't arrived yet. We need that to be able to put that subframe in. So that's why it's kind of in bits at the front at the moment, but that'll all be going together. Bobby's just been trial fitting a few bits where we were concerned by potential clearance issues, and I think we're okay so far. And then his next step, which I believe he will be upstairs in the CAD den for, is just finalising and triple checking the heights again, because we've had some anomalies in terms of the relative heights of the Saab body versus the Audi body between the scan and CAD data and the reality down on the shop floor. So we're just trying to compare the two and make sure everything's right before we weld anything in place. The other side to what Bobby's working on is he's stripping all of the suspension assemblies apart and freeing off all the bolts in them so that he can quickly and easily bolt the suspension on and off. So at the moment there's a lot of seized bolts, seized bushes, things like that that are going to make it difficult to bolt the car together and take it apart again, and we're going to need to do that quite a lot or through this process. And the other thing I would mention, which I'll probably get Jamie to just drop a little clip of in here, is that Bobby, while poorly on Monday and Tuesday, became bored so quickly while he was not very well at all that he also did some CAD work for us, which we kind of briefly mentioned but hadn't really decided on when it was going to get done. We want to make some dummy wheels, basically some adjustable dummy wheels to experiment with offsets, wheel diameters and tyre fitments. So we wanted a generic tyre holder that can offer full adjustability for diameter, offset and width. And such things are available, but they're jolly expensive, and needlessly so. When looking at these parts, I kind of concluded they could be done as a laser cut part. So I mentioned my thoughts to Bobby, and in true Bobby style, he's gone away, taken my thought of, we think that could be laser cut, with that, so there'd be no need for machining, and he's gone away and done it, and then he messaged me on Tuesday to say, I got bored while I was ill, I've done the CAD. So he's did all that on Monday and Tuesday, so now we just need to send that out for quote for laser cutting, and we're then going to make up a full set of offset adjustable, diameter adjustable, tyre width adjustable wheel holders, simulated wheels, and they're going to come in very useful on this car because we need to do some fairly accurate wheel clearance checking prior to George doing the final surfaces in CAD. So that's where we're at on that. Lots of stuff going on, not all of it in front of you. In terms of fabrication, not really any change since last week, but lots of background stuff going on to enable the next phase. So that's where we're at on that one. On E-Type, Tom is working on the rear arch inner tubs, and he has simplified the original Jaguar inner tub structure. We had a little chat about it and decided what to do, because the Jaguar structure, the inner wheel arch structure as done by Jaguar, it was kind of like they designed the first half of it and then couldn't really decide on the back bit, so they just stuck some flat bits in, and it looked a bit half finished and not very complete. So Tom's changed that and put a full sort of more or less a continuous radius into the flat part of the top of the arch tub in the back. So that's now that looks more like one person designed it. And then he's now working on the inner piece that goes up inside here, which is just conveniently is left here, that's the piece that will go inside there, and that then comes up, and then the other piece will then mate with that. Basically, it will be made in 3 pieces, and when it's finished, it will be in 2. There's this section. There'll be an extension piece for this that carries on more or less horizontally straight across, and then there's the piece that's already welded in, which I can't really point out now, but there's another horizontal piece that I was just talking about that forms the radius of the inner arch, and there'll be an overlap joint between the two. There'll be a step and overlap joint between the edge of this piece, which will be about here, and the other piece, which gives us a little bit of room for manoeuvre in terms of the precise positioning of that inwards and outwards versus the wheel arch, which is wise because you don't want to start putting pressure on the quarter panel trying to get this in. So having a sliding joint there is pretty important, and it also means that we just have a convenient point to weld that together. We don't want that all as one welded tub. It becomes very problematic. You normally create a lot of issues doing it that way, because with a nice sliding joint in the middle, it makes it a lot easier to gauge everything. So Tom's done a lovely job of that, all shaped up by hand. Wheeled up to get some crown into it. The edges are shrunk to pull them round, tipped on, I think using the Jenny and pliers for the lip on that, and then that'll be, once all of that is shaped up, that'll then be spot welded into the inside tub. And the patterns that Tom's made for that, the cardboard flat patterns for this side, he's hoping should be, fingers crossed and I'd agree, I think he's right, should be able to be used for the far side, because the wheel arch shapes are pretty much, they should be basically identical. The inner structure shape will probably vary slightly, but there's enough tolerance on everything to allow for the patterns to basically be the same there. So that's what's going on E-Type. So we should be inner arch tubs are progressing well. That's coming on nicely. Once the inner arch tubs are done, there's some final closing off to do at the bottom, the rear bottom part of the arch tub, where there's a slightly more complicated shape. That's going to be done separately. And then there's the inside face of the arch tub where it closes off into the side of the boot aperture. Then that'll be done last. That's just a flat piece, so that's pretty straightforward. And then the internal structure of the boots then got to be looked at. Fuel tank mounts, spare wheel mounting, boot floor reinforcement and battery carrier have all got to be incorporated into the boot floor. So there's fabrication there, which will be various folded sections and shaped sections that are going to add the strength into the boot floor and stop it so it's no longer just one sheet, because at the moment obviously it'd be quite flimsy. So that's what's happening on E-Type. I say in tandem with that, there's various other work going on. We're probably not going to talk about that this week. Partially because George isn't here, but again, I'll let Luke elaborate on that. So that's where things are at on that. And then last but not least, we come on to XJC. Stu's working on XJC, the usual thing. I'm not going to go on about it too much this week, because I think I talked about it quite a lot last week, and I noticed a couple of people have said in the comments that I'd rabbited on for about 15 minutes about air conditioning and heating and ventilation. The reason I went on for a long time is because it is one of the biggest parts of actually doing the substructure in most of the vehicles we build. The HVAC's kind of one of the main pieces, and it's sort of a commonly known thing in the automotive industry that you kind of start with the HVAC unit and build a car around it. It's pretty much how cars are built. It's one of the bits that you can't really move, that sits right in the middle, that you build the bulkhead round, and the rest of the car is built around the bulkhead. So you kind of need to start there. We don't have the benefit of starting there most of the time. We have to start by working around what's already there. And that's what Stu's doing now. As you can see, there's a stocking grate hole in the bulkhead, which is in the process of closing off and modifying the structure, adding the strength back. And then he's making a big closing panel that Jamie will have some footage of, which will close this area off from the elements and form a box that the heater unit sits in, and also will seal off the original ventilation inlet there. We've now got a plan where we're going to draw the air to feed the HVAC unit from the opposite. Originally, this air intake here fed this plenum box. There's a box structure underneath the scuttle panel here, which goes to both sides of the car, and then there was a heater fan, a blower fan, both sides, drawing through an aperture in the underside of this hollow section here inside the car. What we're actually going to do now is draw all of our air for our HVAC system through the far side of those intakes, and Luke will talk a bit more about a job he's done on that. Yeah, basically we've done some design work so that we can put a blower that side, draw through that from that plenum that side, then blow that air across and blow it into the HVAC unit on this side of the bulkhead, and that splits the space constraints down nicely, breaks that down, stops us having a major space constraint in any one place, and means that we can keep structure where we need it, keeps the air intake arrangement nice and tidy and from the original point in the car. It all just works out quite well. There's been a few flips of direction and changes of plan and working things out to get to that stage, but now we're at that stage, it all looks like it's going to work out pretty well. So Stu's now doing all of the major surgery, all of the sort of heart surgery on this area, making all of the bits to fit. So he's making all the closure panels. He's then going to do some little structural changes around the top of the top part, the front of the tunnel, to close that area off. And then we're going to add a reinforcer where we've taken some strength out of the bottom corner of the bulkhead. He's going to put that back with a hollow section that runs from the top corner of the transmission tunnel to the inside of the A-pillar. So where we've lost this corner structure along the bulkhead here, which is a strong point of the bulkhead, we're going to add that back with an actual hollow section that runs under the heater across there, like a tube. It'll be a folded shape, but basically a tube that runs across there to gain the strength back that the corner of the bulkhead would have given us that it won't now. So that's the modifications going on there, and that's the major route forward on the fabrication side of things in here. That's the major route forward. Again, it won't look like there's been leaps and bounds of forward movement, because it is quite a tricky problem. It's involved fitting and unfitting a heater an awful lot of times and trying to work out where to run pipes. Probably the single hardest bit, I could go on forever and I'm not going to, I do 15 minutes on it this week. Probably one of the hardest bits is working out, for example, these are the unions that go onto the heater unit for the water pipes to fit onto. So that would be attached to the heater unit that would be in there. You've got to be able to get a pipe on and off that, or unscrew that and take it off. One of the trickiest bits is working out how to fit and unfit all of the connections that go onto that heater unit, because it's easy to build the heater unit into the car and not then be able to connect things to it. And it's actually quite tricky, and it involves quite a lot of thought of what size loops need to go onto pipes, and also trying to minimise the amount of pipe and joints inside the car, because any one of them could cause a leak. And when they're a nightmare to get at, which these will be because they'll be buried behind the dash, you really don't want too many potential leaks. So there's a lot of thought in that process. Not going to bore you forever, but there is an awful lot of thought that goes on into planning all of that, so that's why that's taking a little while. I think at that point, I'm going to hand over to Mark and let him do a quick roundup on what's going on in the body shop, and then we'll catch up, and I'm going to then take you through assembly shop because Cal's at SEMA. So see you in a mo.
All right, welcome back to another episode. Looks like last week's episode. So yeah, just been blocking away on the Jensen. It's getting there now. Just blocking, trying to get smooth. Some bit of a mess on this side, on this wing, but we're sorting it. Gaz is on it. Gaz still works here, everybody. Look, drinking tea over here. He's not left, he paints, he works here. A few people concerned, where's Gary gone? Still here, still miserable. All right, so. No, all right, so yeah. Cozzy's delayed because we're waiting for the paint. They're waiting for a tinter or something. Moonstone must be really rare. So yeah, must have to get it from the moon or something. From where? Yeah, got to get the time machine out and go back and get it. So yeah, so hopefully next week. We're also waiting for some more polyester. Must be a shortage. Sod making America great. Let's make the UK great again, hey? All right, so yeah, we're going to soldier on with this today, tomorrow. Hopefully get some more polyester on it next week. Hopefully the Cozzy, not promising anything, could see some colour next week. So over to Nat.
So thank you, Mark, and now I'm going to hand over to me in the assembly shop, and we'll go and have a quick rundown in there, and I'll see how confused I can get by unfamiliar territory. Well, thank you, me. And now we are in the assembly workshop in my slightly less familiar environment. But we're going to start with talking about some of what's been going on the Aston Allegro project. And we're specifically going to start with, what would it be but my favourite subject of HVAC. And just because they're quite an interesting thing to see in a way, Ant has been working on getting the HVAC systems for both of the Allegros rebuilt. It's done one and then set to rebuilding the other one, which is basically a clean up and refurbish because they are standard Honda Integra DC2 heater systems. We've made a couple of changes to the way they're controlled, and specifically the fan, which will no longer have a rheostat control on it. It'll be PWM controlled via the I've forgotten the manufacturer, but the electronic control module that's controlling all the power on the car, the PDM, that will be controlling the fan directly via pulse width modulation. So we've not got any resistors on those anymore, so that's gone. We've also had to chop a bit off the end of both these fan units, which was done when the cars were in metalwork, to enable them to clear the inner A pillar of the Aston Allegro, the Aston Allegro being a bit narrower than the Honda in that area. So we've had to just take a little bit off the end of the fan housing, and Ant's bonded some plastic onto the end of those to close off that end of the fan housing. There's nothing very structural about that, it just closes off so the air doesn't blow out. The key bit to it has been cleaning everything up, making sure everything works, pressure testing the heater matrices and the aircon matrices, make sure we've got no leaks there, and which will screw us over once we've fitted the heaters later on. We don't want to find that later on. And then also all of the various shutters and flaps, which Ant has made a whole pile of templates for down here. There are a number of them. I can't remember how many, but there'll be some footage of those. He has refoamed them all because the foam ages on those, particularly the ones that see the hot air. It ages and breaks down and turns to dust, and then you end up with bits of foam dust blowing out of your vents inside the car, and it's not very good. So he has refoamed all of those with some neoprene foam. I nearly forgot what that was as well. So there are neoprene foam pads. I think they're all 3mm thick on both sides of a lot of the flaps, some on one side, some on both sides, and then a thicker neoprene gasket that is made for where the actual whole unit clamps up and pulls up under the bulkhead where the main air intake for it is. So he's got all of those cleaned, ready to fit, everything pressure tested, ready to bolt in now. The fan units will screw on, but I think they'll be screwed on once they get in the car. This black section here on both of these, that's the air conditioning evaporator unit, so the bit that does the cooling, and that is the clamp, the end fitting that holds on the end of the heater matrix in there. So that's the bit that does the heating, and then the air distribution is off what is kind of the top of this unit. That's where all the air is sent out into the various bits of the car. Now we have actually modified that little bit. There's another housing that goes on there, and we have actually modified the way that interfaces with the car because we've made a bit of a structural change around that area compared to the Honda. So that's all good. They're all ready to go. That's nice to see and get to that stage. I'm just checking my list to make sure I haven't forgotten anything drastic there. No. Carrying on Allegro, the other major step forward is that we have an engine in the first of the cars sort of progressing through the workshop. They're kind of vying with each other for position week on week, but the Harvest Gold car has crawled into the lead a little bit again now, because that now has its engine and gearbox fitted, which is enabling us to do some other bits of work in terms of exhaust system. So I think Jim and Ant and George, I think, and possibly a bit of Gibbo as well, were involved in getting the engine into that earlier in the week, or tail end of last week. That might have been on Friday, I think, that the engine was going into that. Either Friday or Monday, I lose track of time a little bit. So that's all now in on its Honda mounts with its Honda mounting rubbers, all standard parts there, all fitted. The Honda really went overkill on the mounts of those engines, which is a good thing, but they're very, very solidly mounted for a front-wheel drive setup. They're very, very solidly mounted for good reason. That was one of the key things to the driving dynamic of those cars, so it's very important. But it's also important for a road car that rubber bushings, pretty much as per the Honda originals, are used. Otherwise, the NVH becomes a fairly big issue. As with the number of mounts there are, noise transmission will become quite major if you use anything much more solid. So that's pretty relevant. So that's all in, and that's enabled us to step forward slightly with the exhaust system. In fact, there's a job I was kind of messing around with a bit earlier this week, was getting, we're actually going to use the stock Honda exhaust manifolds. They are a stainless manifold, although they've surface corroded because they're a lower grade stainless. I can't tell you which one. It might be 303, but I can't remember what stainless they're made from. Although they've surface corroded a little bit, they are stainless. They are intact and there's nothing wrong with them. So I've grit blasted a pair of those, stripped them down, got all the fasteners off to replace, all the studs will be replaced, but the actual manifolds we are grit blasting. They're going to be ceramic coated, but prior to the ceramic coating we want to test fit everything and make sure everything fits properly, and we're also replacing the outlet fitting on both of the downpipes on those with a new ball joint type, new spherical type fitting, which is what they originally had, but they're damaged and old on those manifolds, so we're going to replace those with new ones, and then the manifolds will be ceramic coated and reassembled. But obviously we want to trial fit everything, and also to that end we have a standard Honda Integra DC2 centre section. It's actually an aftermarket one, it's a spoon one, which is currently trial fitted on the car. And that, because of the wheelbase change, means that the front is very slightly short, and now obviously we're not running catalysts on those cars, so what would be your sort of catalyst position is now shortened by the wheelbase change on the car with where the manifold, with where the system sits. Moved one of the centre mountings back by the wheelbase change to sort that out. The system's then shunted forward a little bit, and that leaves us with a short gap, which will have the new spherical joint plus a short section of pipe let in there, and no one would ever know that it wasn't a standard thing, which is quite pleasing. So that's what's happening on that. Let me also just check what else I've missed. Yes, further things on Allegro. George, who is new George, as we call him, who is away today, he's not very well. This bug is, as I mentioned earlier, going around everybody. He's quite poorly. He came in yesterday morning and then went home again because he really wasn't very well. He has been rebuilding the power steering pump for this. We have bought reconditioned power steering pumps for both the cars, but the cosmetic standard of the reconditioning doesn't really meet our requirements. So we have elected to recondition those pumps from a cosmetic point of view. So we have stripped those down. Now a couple of parts of those pumps are actually bonded together, so we've had to debond them, strip them down. They're basically a big aluminium canister that encloses the bottom part of the pump. We've had to strip that out, debond that, take all the pump apart, We've sourced new plastic reservoirs to go onto the top of those pumps, so that'll look brand new. And then the bottom, the aluminium canister, has been bead blasted and painted, refinished, and then we've rebonded that on with an epoxy panel bond onto the bottom of the unit. There's originally a groove cast into the aluminium housing, which had a bonding agent applied to it, and then that canister was fitted, so we've just repeated that with an epoxy bonding agent. In fact, we've used a panel bond to attach that. So cosmetically now those pumps are up to, well, that pump is up to scratch. We've still got the second one to do, but the one for the first car, for the Harvest Gold car, that one is now done, so that can go in as soon as we've got some other bits in place and the brackets are all coated. I think the brackets are out at Xylan coating now, so everything's moving forward well on that. So the exhaust system's moving forward, and really then it's onto engines. As I say, that engine's fitted, which means that James has now been able to move on to stripping the second engine down. We didn't want to get too far into the second engine until the first one was done, so that we've kind of got a rolling visual guide with the two. It's handy to have. If you've got the choice, it's always handy to have a part built as it will be finally built next to the one you're building. It's always a very useful guide if you've got that luxury, which we have on this occasion, so we're doing it. But now that one's in, Jim's stripping the second engine down. He's done the same as he did last time, fitted blanking plates to all of the ways in to that cylinder head and block. So it's all completely blanked off. And then this morning we've bead blasted that block and head. Prior to any further strip down, we've bead blasted it all with it all still built up and with blanking plates closing off any ways in. Which enables us to bead blast it with getting a minimal amount of grit out. Hopefully no glass bead at all inside the engine, but if any does get in, it's just easier to wash out because there'll be less of it. Now everything will be stripped, all the gallery bungs are removed, everything's removed back to the castings on those engines. So anything that does get in will get cleaned out anyway. I have no problem with that at all. We could put as much bead in as we like. It's just that it's a harder job. The more there is in there, the more the chance of you missing a tiny bit. Whereas if you blank it off as best you can, try and make sure none gets in, and then if any tiny bits do get in, you're pretty much guaranteed you're going to be able to clean them out. Obviously, we've got to clean all the oil residue out of all the oilways, any tars, and any other mess and any particles that are in there have all got to be cleaned, brushed, and jet washed out anyway. So that block, we don't know yet whether the bores will be good or not in that one, or whether it will be going for machining or not. If it does go for machining, it will probably get jet washed down here after the bead blasting anyway. It will go for machining. It will go through a hot wash at the machine shop. It will come back, and then before it's finally built up, we will hot jet wash all of the galleries out in that block again prior to the final build-up. So it will certainly have at least 3 washes after the bead blasting as well. It will be very, very thoroughly clean. We'll actually think about the first of those washes that happens here after strip down will probably be an hour hot wash. So we'll probably go through our hot wash, then off for machining if it needs machining. It'll be hot washed again there. Then when it comes back, we will jet wash it outside in the yard with a jet wash so that we can actually blast down all of the gallery plugs through all the waterways, and every open passage on that engine, every part that fluid travels through will be jet washed out with a jet wash out in the yard. So just to make sure there's nothing trapped. So that's what's going to be happening with that. But at the moment, it's bead blasted. So all the casting, the outer faces of all the castings look nice and bright, and it looks kind of like a new one. And then the next stage will be to strip it all down and get all that sorted out. So that's good. Yeah, really, that's about that. There's various interior progress on those as well, but I'm going to hand over to Richard in a little bit, and he'll guide you. He's going to take you through that. So moving on from that, Alex is also getting on with the wiring looms, and he's now at the stage of actually undertaking the assembly on the wiring looms. All the design work's finished, all the specification of all the parts is finished, all the parts are ordered, and he is in the process of actually laying out the wiring now on his loom table upstairs. So hopefully now the looms should come together relatively quickly for those, and they'll hopefully dovetail in smoothly with us needing to fit stuff like these HVAC units inside the car, because we're getting to the point where everything can come together really there. We've got the interiors pretty much to hand, all the interior parts, including all the HVAC. Some of the dash are all ready to go. The mechanical parts are all ready to go or already assembled. So everything's coming together pretty speedily now on the Allegro project. So it's really good to see. One of, if not currently my favourite, I'd certainly say one of my favourite projects that we've ever undertaken, those cars. I just love the perfect intermingling of old British Leyland and relatively modern Honda, and the fact that they've slotted together so well is very satisfying when it happens. So moving on to Camaro, there are various bits of progress occurring on that. As you say, this project's been kind of waiting in the wings in the background for a long, long time. Obviously, we cover a little bit each week. This project's been moving on in stages in keeping with the owner's ability to fund that progress, which is fine. He's a very good guy, and we've worked together for a long time on the car now, and it's a beautiful car coming together really rather well. And we're in the kind of latter stages now, which is really pleasing because we can't wait to get this out on road test, which will probably be at a horrible weather time of year, as it always seems to be. But moving on with this, we've been waiting for some parts to complete the handbrake actuation, which were Xylan coated parts. They've come back. We've had the next batch of bits back. We've pretty much always got a batch of parts at East Midlands Coatings who do our Xylan coating, which to those who don't know is a PTFE type of coating, a fluorocarbon coating. They have just returned as a batch of Xylan coated parts, which has enabled us to complete the handbrake mechanism assembly on this car. And we've also covered last week the billet parts that we received for the centre console. The centre console, the main body of the centre console is 3D printed. Again, you've seen all that before, but the billet parts are going to the top of it. You saw those come back last week. They've now gone back out for anodising. There's a lot of processes that have to dovetail together for all these things, and one of them is that those need a coating on them. They've now gone out. The decision was made on what coating was going to go on those, so they've now gone out for anodising. So hopefully next week they should be back, and we'll be pretty much in a position where Richard can finish the trim work and finish getting that centre console together. Again, I probably ought to let Richard talk a bit more about this, because most of the other progress on Camaro is in his ballpark, so I'm going to let him talk about that. And moving on from there, we're going to go on to the Churchill Jaguar, and again, most of this is Richard's realm, but what I will just say is that Stu has been doing a little bit of work on that this morning, getting some of the brass parts bolted into place for the door tops, because the next stage is sorting out the door cards for Churchill. And to that end, we've got a bit of a design department and trim department co-effort, but that relied on having all of the structural bits in place. So Stu's been refitting those bits this morning for Luke, and then Richard can crack on with some work on that as well. At that point, I think that's a good time to hand over to Richard and let him talk you through the interior trim work that's been going on, because there's been quite a lot of jobs on various projects. So over to Richard.
How's it, everybody? Thank you, Nat. It's good. Yeah, I'm at Retropower for a change. I've been very nice being able to work with the guys over here, not by my old lonely self there in the den on the mez. So it's been great this week. You can't see the car, but I did a bit on Churchill. I think last week Cal chatted about the Churchill, the interior coming together. So I've did some cards, just rough patterns. So this week I've tweaked those patterns just to get them a little bit closer. Then Luke and Stu is busy fitting some dashboard bits and the wooden bits that goes around here, veneering bits. So all of this, because it's all one big puzzle, so you can't just do one thing separately. You have to almost do everything together to make it work. So we're at that crucial point now. So we're all just tapping in on that. So that's going to happen in the background. As you can see, I'm here with the very nice Allegro, and I'm busy with the roof lining. So one of our favorite jobs here. So this is a nice white roof lining. It's looking nice. So if this one is successful, I had to do a small tweak. If this one is successful, I'll straight away go on to the second one. Alex has been kind enough to just put a little string. I think there's a wire at the end of that. Yeah. Put the interior light wires through, so we won't have to fish through. So that's all in place. It just makes our lives easier. So it's all a bit. I've stretched it out with the clips. I can show you. I use these Clicco clips. I do not like using the Bulldog clips, and the reason is these things are heavily spring-loaded. Do not put your finger in there because it does hurt. But that thing allows me to clamp it. I can stretch this thing out very tightly to get it nice and tight, because that's the whole aim of the game. The thing is, why I like using these is that is on there solid. With a Bulldog clip or any other clip that doesn't have this nice spring in, what can happen is I will clamp it on this side, and then I've got to go to the rear of the car and now start putting some tension on it. And then as you pull it, the clip pings off. And then this is a brand new painted car, and you've seen the size of Mark. I do not want to mess with those guys. So that's why we use these clips, make sure it's secure, I can get the necessary tension on it, and then I start gluing it bit by bit. So hopefully Jamie will get some shots of that nearly complete, and he'll put it in this episode. So can't wait to show you that. Then it's on to the next one. Jamie's got me on the Camaro as well. That was a bit of door cards. I got to put my hand up. We did these lovely door cards. We're busy waiting for some billet strips. They've gone off for the coating now. And Tuesday, I think, I thought, oh, let me put the door cards on, because the kick panels and everything that touches, so I thought just a little bit of fettling. And to my surprise, like a rookie mistake is what we say, is the doors didn't close. So I had to take them off, peel them back. I think Jamie's got me, and then I've chamfered all the edges. Blessing in disguise, it actually looks very much nicer than what it looked square, so there's a bit more shape to them. I don't know if you can really see it in the video, but it does look cool. So the doors are closing now, nice and easy. It doesn't bounce back, because that's irritating of a door if you need to keep smacking that door. So got that in. I also managed to trim the footwell kick panels. That's part of that, so I tweaked them. They're just ready for the speakers now. And the next step will be just putting it all together. So it's a bit of a waiting game on those ones. So I think that pretty much wraps it up for this week, Jamie. So I will see you guys next week.
Cool. Okay, thank you, Richard. And tying in beautifully again, really, there, in that quite a bit of Richard's work has been tying in recently with Luke. I'm going to hand straight over to Luke upstairs, because his progress has been fairly instrumental to a number of the jobs that we've talked about going on around the workshop. So over to Luke. He can take you through the CAD Den progress this week.
Hi guys, welcome back to yet another week back up here in the CAD cave. We don't have George today. He's out gallivanting with Cal across the pond over at SEMA, which is super exciting. Definitely a bucket list thing, and I'm really excited to see what he comes back with photo-wise for that, because obviously this is like a big pinnacle of the year in our industry. But nonetheless, I've been here very busy getting on with a culmination of many different things across many different projects. I think I'm going to start off with what I've been doing over the last 2 days, which is for the XJC. I think if anyone has ever tried to fit aircon into a car that didn't originally come with aircon, or came with a very antiquated system of aircon, you know the struggles of trying to fit in a box which is about this big into a car which doesn't have this much space. So what we're doing this time is we're actually splitting off the fan unit on the HVAC to a different area in the car. This is normally bolted on to an entire HVAC unit about this long, so we're taking it off and we're moving it over to the driver's side. And normally what we would do if it was part of the HVAC unit is have all the pipework as separate pieces which kind of duct to the fan. Since we are already moving it, it makes a lot more sense to make that all as one big unit. So you have your intakes feeding to both sides, and then an outtake feeding across the dash over to the rest of the HVAC unit, all as one complete thing, bolted together with the fan in the middle, this fan right here, and then that should all work super nicely. So I've been getting on with that. That's now ready to prototype, along with all the other standard kind of ducting adapters which go on the HVAC unit. So taking then, fan goes to HVAC, HVAC then goes to your vents and everything within the car, the ducts that then take it out to the vents. So that's finished, ready for prototype. And then on top of that, really exciting phases in terms of actually getting things ready to manufacture. So across 2 cars, the Interceptor and Churchill, both center consoles at least, are now ready for manufacture. Went through the whole design process, client was happy, and now I've split everything down into manufacturable parts, 3D printable side panels, top panel, all the little gubbinses, your phone chargers, your gear surrounds, all of this now ready to go, ready for review, and then ready to be put into the car. And then on top of that, what else have I been doing? Oh yeah, designed the Aston interior as well. That went out to the client last week, so I'm waiting back to hear what he should think about that, but I think he's going to be pretty happy. From the brief that he gave, I think I've stuck to that pretty well, and the end result of it is looking pretty fresh. So once I get the tick on that, I can go through the same process that I'm going through currently with Churchill and the Interceptor, and then yeah, I can get fast forwarded a little bit too. other than that, I think, yeah, enjoy the rest of the video.
So thank you, Luke. And then I think it's time for us to go down to the den and have a little look around there. And I'm going to hand over to me again down at the den. And I'm going to really scratch my head to try and remember what's been going on at the den. So I'll need to quiz Nick a little bit about that before we do that. But I shall see you down there. Right, so thank you, me. Again, I'm covering all bases today and really going to be taxing my memory, but I've had a quick chat with Nick about what's going on down here. So we will proceed over to a Jaguar X308. I'm going to dance through here and march over to stand between, a thorn between two roses, I think we might call this bit. Yeah, so Nick has got the X308 pretty much back in one piece now, with the exception of the dash, where he's going to be working on getting the Apple CarPlay installation sorted out, which I have to profess and hold my hand up. When it comes to that sort of thing, I know absolutely zero, so I'm going to leave that down to him and Cal, because I know nothing about that. But he has achieved the unpleasant task of rebushing pretty much all of the suspension on this car now. So it should drive about as close to a new one of these as it's ever likely to. He has now run the engine up with its new timing chain guides, and is it new chains as well, Nick? Chains guides a lot. Yeah, cool. So basically all new timing arrangement on the front. So that's beautifully quiet now. He's had that out for a test drive. That's all good. He's had the car on the 4-post lift on the wheel alignment and checked all the alignment, and that's all as close as you're ever likely to get a Jag X308, I would say. I think there was I think there might be a 9-minute difference on the cambers, I think, something like that. But other than that, it's pretty much crack-on symmetrical, all aligned about as likely as about as good as you're ever going to get one of these. So we're really pleased with that. Engine's all quiet, bonnet's bolted back on. Bumpers are on, I think that was covered last week, but bumpers are on, painted and sorted. Yes, the paintwork on the car still leaves a little bit to be desired in a few areas, but that's a known factor in here. I think Dale is going to work some magic with the final detailing of it and try and get it to be a little bit shinier and a little bit improved overall. But generally, nearly there now, just the Apple CarPlay to sort out, and that is completely gone through. Everybody's happy, good to go and hand over. So that's where we're at with X308. Over to my right, Nick's just actually putting the 2002 back on the lift. He pretty much wrapped up all of the first round of things on that, but there's some additional jobs which are going to be that the owner would like some adjustable bushings putting on the rear arms on that, so he can set the geometry a bit more favourably on the back. So Nick's going to get on with that. He's getting the bushings ordered, I believe, now, and then tomorrow and into the early part of next week, he'll get the bushings sorted on the back of that, so that's done. And I think there's some wheel spaces need changing as well. I think the spaces are slightly too wide at the moment on it, so it needs just narrowing up a little bit because a bit of wheel clearances are a little bit tight. And I think with the bushings adjusted as well, that might all be slightly too tight, so there might be a tweak needed there. But that's pretty much ready to go as well now. I'm not going to cover the other work that was done on that because you've seen all that before. You saw that last week and the week before, so good progress there. This is going to be a very, very brief tour this week, as I say, because I'm not generally as au fait with things going on down here as Nick and Cal are. I think hopefully fairly soon we'll probably have Nick doing the videos down here as well, so that so we keep the continuity of who's working on what. And then we'll move around here because lurking around this corner is Utah. Now the appearance of the car hasn't changed, but there's some work going on in the background. You'll recall that we'd removed the gearbox from this. It's a Getrag 420G gearbox, which are a pretty robust gearbox. But we had there was a bit of a synchro snick on second gear, I think it is, on that. And so the synchros, the owner wanted the synchros going through on this over winter while he's not using the car. Wanted that going through. Now the problem with the Getrag 420G gearbox is similar to the problem with a Getrag 265 gearbox, which is that they both use a shrunk on fifth gear. I've learnt a lot about this thanks to Neil at All Gears in Worksop, who now has the gearbox for this car, and he is quite an expert on those Getrag gearboxes. And as far as I'm aware, and have been made aware, he's probably the only person, certainly that I'm aware of, in the UK that can fully strip one of those gearboxes down and actually remove the 5th gear from the lay shaft. It's pressed on, well, it's shrunk on, it's pressed and shrunk onto the lay shaft with a force. The removal force is around 30 tons to remove that gear. So it's quite a tricky operation. You need a fairly specialist piece of kit to do it. And Neil visited last Saturday and we had quite a lengthy chat, to say the least. And he brought down various things to show me, one of which was a typical lay shaft assembly where somebody has tried to pull the 5th gear off the lay shaft using a normal hydraulic puller. And it basically breaks the teeth off the gear because you just can't apply the load in the right place. Neil has the tool to pull that, has a tool that he had made, a hydraulic press tool that he had made to pull that gear off the shaft. So he is now entrusted with the 420G gearbox out of that car, so he can get that rebuilt and get that back to us hopefully at some point within December, fingers crossed, as long as all goes well. He's also going to refinish, because that was never done. This car was built originally with an unrebuilt gearbox. At the customer's choice, we kind of collectively decided it's probably not worth rebuilding. They're very strong gearboxes, they're difficult to rebuild, it's all in clean and known good condition, so it was used as a used gearbox. But that's slightly bitten us in that the synchro on second gear wasn't perfect. It's not completely terrible, but it's not perfect. Only wants it perfect, and in the scheme of things, it may as well be sorted out over winter. So yeah, that gearbox is out with Neil at all gears. That'll be completely rebuilt, all new bearings, new synchros. The casings will be, well, I tell a lie, not necessarily new synchros. All synchros measured, checked, and any that are okay will be reused. Neil was at pains to tell me this, saying that actually just fitting new ones, not necessarily the benefit it may seem, because the originals, as long as the gaps are okay on them and they're all lapped together correctly, actually you're better off reusing them if they're in good condition. However, if they're out of spec and the gaps have closed up, then obviously they'd need replacement, but that needs to be done with care and attention to the fit. So yeah, that's pretty much, and while he's got that part, the casings are going to be vapor blasted and all of the fasteners will be plated as well. So that's hopefully given around about a month and a bit. We should have the gearbox back for that, and then that can go back together and go back to its owner as well. And I think at that point, I'm going to wrap things up. I can just see Martin over in the background actually beavering away doing some more DIY jobs down here. Actually, I mentioned him in the background as he's one of the unsung heroes of the background, beavering away. We might actually have Martin doing a little bit of metal work at some point soon as well, so that'll be an interesting one to see back up at Retropower. But I think for this week, I've covered a lot. My brain's about fried, so we're going to call it quits at that, and we'll see you with a more normal lineup next week.